Bună seara, domnule profesor Angel, domnule rector Mircea Dumitru, doamnelor și domnilor. Suntem la 30-a conferință a Ateneului, conferințe care urmăresc să consolideze o reputație care mă iluzionez să cred că a câștigat-o acest proiect, ținând seama că nu toată lumea și nu totdeauna proiectul acesta a avut o înțelegere și o intrare bună chiar în lumea intelectuală. Invitatul din această seară, domnul profesor Pascal Angel, profesor de filozofie modernă și contemporană la Universitatea din Geneva, directorul de studii al Școlii Superioare de Înalte Studii Științifice Sociale din Paris, o personalitate care în lumea filozofiei are o poziție foarte consolidată, ne onorează în această seară și vreau să-i mulțumesc domnului profesor pentru prezența domniei sale aici. Vedem. Vreau să mulțumesc în mod special din nou domnului rector Mircea Dumitru. De fapt, el este autorul acestui moment și a acestui moment. Vreau să exprim prețuirea mea pentru tot ceea ce face, pentru un moment labil din lumea românească de astăzi. O personalitate cunoscută, membru corespondent al Academiei, profesor și rector de filozofie la Universitatea București. Domnule rector, prețuire și recunoștință. O să profit pentru că momente publice în care eu să manifest un punct de vedere sunt destul de rare. Vreau să repet ceea ce am spus de la inițierea acestor conferințe. Cred cu tărie că doar elita intelectuală este cea care zidește. Trebuie sprijinită de noi toți ceilalți care avem mare nevoie. Ceilalți, spunea Eugeniu Speranțea, un autor, un sociolog pe care tot îl invoc ori de câte ori am mici probleme conflictuale, spunea că ceilalți pot cel mult să consume din ceea ce face elita intelectuală. Spun acest lucru și, repet, conferințele au, în opinia mea, această menire. Și Ateneul Român trebuie să fie un spațiu în care exercițiul academic, exercițiul de rafinament intelectual să aibă un drept câștigat. Știu că se comentează acest punct de vedere al meu. Voi continua să-l susțin pentru că cred că este un punct de vedere necesar României de astăzi, cu axiologie pierdută, fără modele reale, fără principii și fără valori. Aici, la Ateneul Român, ar trebui să fie locul care aceste comandamente pe care trebuie să le aibă o societate care se vrea europeană, trebuie să le aibă în vedere. Și încă un punct de vedere pentru care eu am fost blamat, țin foarte mult ca Ateneul Român, instituția muzicală, să aibă loc doar pentru cei consacrați. Debuturile incerte, presiunile de toate felurile, să nu poată stabili nimic din programul, din strategia și obiectivele instituției noastre. Vă mulțumesc! Momentul muzical. Tradiția noastră introduce și acest lucru. Este cadoul pe care Filarmonica îl face invitatului, profesorului Angel, tânărul și talentatul Andrei Licareț, cu 2 momente muzicale, Schumann-Chopin. rog să preluați sarcinile gazdei.
Which one do you like to take? Good evening, and thank you very much for being this evening here with us. We appreciate very much the fact that you took your time to be with us at this dialogue, this discussion with Professor Pascal Angel, a very good and dear friend of ours here in Bucharest, in Romania, and especially of philosophers at the University of Bucharest. Before we really start, let me say a few things about our feelings concerning the constant support of the Romanian Atheneum, especially of Mr. Andrei Dimitriu, the Director General of this wonderful, great institution. I appreciate very much his moral courage and the fact that under not very political circumstances nowadays in Romania, he has the stamina to make tough decisions concerning the music, the culture, and the agenda of this institution. Some weeks ago, we had the privilege to have on this stage a Nobel Prize winner, a famous chemist, French one, Jean-Marie Lehn, who is now Doctor Honoris Causa of the University of Bucharest, and over the years, he contributed, this institution and also Mr. Dimitriu, to bringing here important personalities of the arts, of science and philosophy. Now, Professor Pascal Angel, thank you very much for accepting this dialogue.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
You are on a very tight schedule. You arrived in Bucharest yesterday in the evening, and tomorrow morning you are supposed to be back in Paris because you teach at noon. So it's a very short intermezzo, to use a musical term, a musical word. But I hope that it will be a worthwhile experience, both for you, and I'm sure that that will be a good experience for us. So let me add a few words about the personality of our most distinguished guest this evening. Professor Pascal Angel studied at École Normale Supérieure, Rue d'Ulm in Paris. Likewise, he studied at La Sorbonne, at the Université de Provence, and at UC Berkeley, where he studied under Donald Davidson. He has taught in the universities of Paris 12, Grenoble, Caen, Paris 4, Sorbonne, and at the University of Geneva. He has held visiting positions in a number of universities, among which Montreal, Hong Kong, Tunis, Athens, Aarhus, Canberra, Oslo, Nottingham, Leuven, and Lund. He is Secretary General of the International Institute of Philosophy and a member of Academia Europaea. He has written extensively on the philosophy of logic, philosophy of language, and on the philosophy of mind. And you'll see in our discussion that he devoted a lot of time and he gave many thoughts on a philosophical triangle, the triangle of belief, knowledge, and truth. And we are going to touch upon that in our discussion. He is currently working on issues in epistemology, especially the epistemology of belief and epistemic norms. He is also interested in theories of truth, and this is one of the main reasons we are going to address this evening this topic of the respect for truth, what it is and what it means. He published many monographs, many books, including The Norm of Truth, 1991, Davidson et la philosophie du langage, 1994, Introduction à la philosophie de l'esprit, 1994, Philosophie et psychologie, 1996, La dispute, 1997, Truth in English, 2002, Ramsay, Truth and Success, with a colleague of his, Jérôme Dokic, in 2002, À quoi bon la vérité, with the famous American philosopher Richard Rorty, with whom he had a dialogue, a public dialogue, many years ago in La Sorbonne.
A fight.
A fight, yeah. Well, I hope this evening won't be a fight, because we are practically very similar on many issues that we are going to discuss. But it's good to know that you fight in philosophy. Anyhow, that became a book, a very successful book, a bestseller, which has also been translated into Romanian, the book on truth with Richard Rorty. Va Savoir in 2007, he is editor of the collection of essays, Inquiries into Meaning and Truth, 1991, Précis de philosophie analytique, 2000, Believing and Accepting, 2000, and he has been for many years an editor of Dialectica, which currently is the official journal of the European Society for Analytic Philosophy. As a matter of fact, in order to pay a public tribute to Professor Angel, I have to say that he was one of the initiators of this European Society for Analytic Philosophy, which every 3 years is organizing a World Congress, and in Bucharest, we had the privilege to organize this Congress in 2014. And thank you very much for all your work that you devoted to philosophy and to the community of philosophers and humanists at large.
Well, I thank you very much for your invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and to have the possibility to discuss these issues, those triangles, those rectangles, those circles with you.
Okay. Now, in order to frame the discussion and to give some reference for the further topics that we are going to address, let me start by raising an issue, a question. Why do philosophers talk that much about truth? I recall this very funny story. It's a real, true fact. Starting with this conference that we had in 2013 in Bucharest, the conference of the International Institute of Philosophy, and the topic for that conference has also been the truth. And we published the proceedings of that conference at the publishing house of the University of Bucharest, and of course the title of the proceedings is The Truth. And I showed that book to a well-distinguished sociologist at the University of Bucharest, whom I admire, and I like him very much. And in a sort of ironical mood and tone, he told me, "But you philosophers are so arrogant. You dare to publish a book with the title, The Truth." And I pointed out to him that the title didn't have the definite article, The Truth. It was only truth. Much modest, I would say, yeah. Well, as you very well point out in some of your papers and monographs, there are now plenty of books and professional papers in which philosophers are devoting their analysis to this concept of truth, and it is obvious that most of them actually fall in love with truth. They even are obsessed with truth sometimes. And this may be due to the fact that truth is a central philosophical notion. It may very well be the central philosophical notion, because many other crucial notions in philosophy depend on truth. And you give a very nice list in your book on truth, and you mention that, for instance, thought is related to truth. Roughly, thought is an objective content of sentences which truly describe state of affairs or facts. Then belief. To believe something is to believe that something to be true. Knowledge. If one knows a proposition, then that proposition has to be true. Reality. Reality is what our true statements, beliefs, and theories are about. Existence or being. Can we talk truly about non-existence? Facts. Facts are what make our statements true. Possibility and necessity. Can one say something true about what is merely possible? Are there propositions which can be true in all possible worlds? So it looks as if there were no important notions in philosophy and in the infrastructure of science which are not related to the notion of truth. So this is why, prima facie, we can say that truth is of utmost importance for whomever wants to describe reality. But then if we step outside philosophy per se, if we go into science, truth is central for science because, by and large, science is a search of truth. Science has also some other aims, but one of the most important aims of science is just to get more and more truth. If we go to practical life, some philosophers, whom we call moral realists, claim that the good or the just are object of knowledge. And insofar as knowledge involves truth, this notion is relevant in the practical realm as well. So, to understand what truth is seems to be a major philosophical task. But the current dispute and the current debate and the importance, the value of truth is not about philosophy only. In our daily lives, in religion or in politics, we should be concerned about truth. And let's take, to begin with, religion. The promise of the truth has always been very comforting and powerful. The most quoted gospel verse may be John 14:6, in which Jesus proclaims, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Why do we feel moved and touched by these words? Of course, because we all have this sense that truth is much more than an abstract philosophical or logical notion, a property of propositions or whatever. It is essential to living well. And you speak very nicely in your books about this eudaimonic value and source of the truth. However, despite all this, in more recent times, apparently truth is threatened by skepticism, relativism, and nihilism. It is not uncommon to hear people deny that there is such a thing as the truth at all, only opinions. That is what is true for me or true for you. So, one issue that we should touch upon. Do you consider that we are already living in an age of post-truth in which there are actual alternative facts on top of the actual real facts, making the whole distinction between real states of affairs and merely possible states of affairs an antiquated metaphysical doctrine? Some disturbing facts, just to finish this sketch of the frame of reference for our discussion. It's been very much in the news lately, this disturbing fact that Oxford Dictionary, after many discussions, debates, and research, declared the word post-truth as the word of the year 2016, an adjective defined as, and I quote from Oxford Dictionary, relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. Another fact, before I stop this introduction, a disturbing fact showing a symptom of a cultural decline. Scanning millions of books and written texts, Google's Ngram viewer shows that the word truth was used only a third as much at the turn of the millennium in 2000 as it was 150 years previously. So it seems that the problem is not that we lack a proper understanding of what truth means, but primarily the problem is about how and by whom truth is established. And this shows a symptom of a lack of trust, a sort of negative attitude toward truth. So I would like to ask you firstly, what is your view, what is your stance on the value of truth? Why should we care? Why should we respect the truth in real life, in philosophy? Then we are going to touch the same issue, speaking about politics, about the internet. And if you like to give some philosophical clarification of some notions that are related to truth.
Well, thanks a lot. Yes, of course. You have sort of summarized all the major issues which are important for everyone, both for philosophers and for the public life in general. Now, it's correct to say that the philosophers are professionally concerned with truth, and they discuss this notion very much. But there is a large distance between the concern of philosophers and the concerns of people in daily life. In daily life, what has happened is more or less easy to state. I mean, what has happened is that religion and the concern for religious truth has more or less been now is much less important for philosophers than it used to be. And of course, we live in philosophy in a realm of post-truth, and many philosophers have been skeptics about whether truth exists. And the most famous are people like Nietzsche, and today some French philosophers, I'm afraid to quote them. So there is a sort of disrespect for truth on the part of philosophers, even though some other philosophers are very much dealing with these issues, I mean, the technical philosophers. But let us leave aside the technical philosophy about what is a truth and so on. We shall come back to it maybe. What happens in our time is that we live in a world of disrespect for truth and distrust for truth. Why is that so? Because we have no confidence in the kind of information that we get for many quarters, from politicians, from scientists, from all sorts for all sorts of reasons. We believe that we are surrounded by an army of liars and people who are trying to fake the truth. This is most obvious in the recent politics, especially in the United States since Trump's election. So there is a big distrust for truth. On the other hand, truth is something which we need. I mean, if you want to know what is the amount of money which is left on your bank account, I hope there's a lot. You have to
Depends
check.
on the time of the month.
You have to check. You want also to know whether you have a certain kind of illness. You want to know various things which are very important for daily life. So we have a tendency to reject the very solemn and very the big concept of truth, truth with a great T. But we nevertheless accept small truths. I mean, we accept trivial, daily and truth for our daily life. So truth is not, there is an ambiguous state of this notion. But basically, there is a real distrust for the very notion of truth. This is why philosophers have tended not to speak about it so much, and people are suspicious. Now, in all these domains, we have to say that there is an atmosphere of relativism, that is an atmosphere of subjectivism, where everyone believes that they have a right to their own opinion. We live in democracies, hopefully, but the democracy is the reign of opinion. I mean, it's opinion against opinion. So truth is out of the picture in the sense that nobody expects to get any kind of certainty, and we also distrust experts. People who come to us saying that they know the truth, even if they are scientists, experts, and especially if they are priests or religious people or religious group, we are suspicious. So we live in a time of relativism, and relativism is certainly, I believe myself, not only a false doctrine, but a bad doctrine. It creates the atmosphere that groups cannot come together, that there cannot be any objective standard. In general, relativism is a suspicion about anything which is objective. The problem with relativism is that it is self-contradictory. I mean, if I say to you relativism is true, and this is my opinion, you see immediately the contradiction.
Self-defeating, yeah, self-refuting.
Which is self-refuting. I mean, or if you say relativism is true for me. As soon as you say something like this, global relativism is really a stupid doctrine, I would say. But many people nevertheless accept that there are local relativism. For instance, in matters of taste, in matters of artistic appreciation, in matters maybe of certain kind of doctrine that you hold, people seem to accept a certain amount of relativism. The problem is that even in the domain, say, for instance, of taste, it's not clear that there cannot be any objective standards. After all, we taste certain kind of foods, and we know which restaurants produce bad food and which restaurants produce good food. So we have those standards.
So even in matter of taste, there are some objective standards.
I would say so, but it's another topic. Yeah. I mean, I won't go into that because... so I'm an objectivist and a realist on many counts. But of course, I know it is a difficult doctrine because everyone, more or less, is against realism about truth. So there is an atmosphere of what has been called by a British philosopher, veryphobia. Yeah. We have a phobia of everything which
like
looks like...
aletophobia, yes.
But something, there is this sort of hostile landscape. Our role as philosophers is to try to clarify those concepts. And in that respect, I find that there is very often a set of confusions which are made about the notion of truth. Indeed, and I'm glad that you quoted Jesus in John 1:20, when he says, I am the truth. And Pilate comes and he doesn't believe that this guy could be the truth. How could one person be the truth? We know that there are true propositions. We know that there are theories. You know that there are true beliefs, that there are true sentences. But a man, and also a man with, at the same time, a God, who tells us that he is the truth, that's really incredible. So it's quite normal for Pontius Pilate to have been sort of bewildered by, yes, by this claim. So nobody really respects or looks for truth as a sort of person. Truth is not a god, it's not a goddess. So we cannot respect something which has this sort of solemnity and divinity. This is in large part one of the kind of arguments that you find in Nietzsche, where Nietzsche says, well, imagine that truth were a woman. We would fall in love, and so he mocks this kind of language. But we can make, nevertheless, some distinctions which I find useful. The first distinction I would make is a threefold one. First, you have the property of truth. What is truth? Is it the property of corresponding to reality, or is it the property of being coherent among a set of beliefs, and so on and so forth? So there is a problem of what is exactly the property that we are ascribing to certain beliefs and to certain propositions when we say that this is true or this is false. That's the first thing.
So actually we can give a hint saying that the truth is whatever is the object that is shared by all the true sentences, for instance.
Of course, we can say that. And of course, there is a further issue of exactly how it can be assessed. Then there is a second question, which is, how do we know the truth? How can we believe the truth? And how do we know the truth? And of course, everyone agrees that it's difficult to know the truth. Knowledge is hard to come by. We know that science seeks the truth, but that we also know that many scientific theories are come to be refuted, many scientific theories become false, and this is in part one of the reasons of the skepticism that people feel. They don't believe that there is a kind of absolute certainty which can be reached through science. So there is this epistemological aspect of truth. How do we know it? And then there is a third question, which is different from the others, which is the question of the value of truth. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it valuable or is it not valuable? And of course, as soon as someone comes with a title of a lecture or of a dialogue like the one we are having now, with the title Respect for Truth, people say, well, you are joking. How can we, why respect truth as truth? We all know that there are many cases where it is good not to know the truth. We know that there are many cases where it is good not to say the truth to various people because they are ignorant, and if they knew, they would make a mess, or because we would hurt them by saying the truth. We also know that there are certain domains in politics and in public life where things have to be private and non-public. I mean, think of spies. It would be stupid to reveal the name of spies and the things that they know. The job of a spy is to hide the truth. It's not to reveal it.
The job of philosopher is
and
to
especially
reveal
for
the truth.
other spies. So, of course, I mean, the people who like the spy novels would be really very disappointed if there were no secrets, no secrecy. So there are all those domains and all these circumstances where there is no reason to desire or to seek for the truth. Everyone agrees with that. But nevertheless, there is a problem with that, which is that even when you are skeptical about truth, as many people are, even when you are skeptical about the value of truth, because you say that there are circumstances where it's better to be self-deceived, for instance. It's no good to blind oneself, one's defect, for instance. But sometimes you are better off when, for instance, you say to yourself, I'm going to recover from my illness. Sometimes you are better off. Even doctors say that. So there are all those circumstances, but the question is, do those circumstances, do those occasions where we disvalue truth, or do those circumstances where we learn that truth is not easy to find, or even sometimes it is inaccessible. I mean, maybe truth is inaccessible for very remote planets or the origin of the universe and so on and so forth. And even when it is difficult to know what the single word true means and what it is to apply it to certain kind of sentences. The philosophers are very fond of, for instance, of discussing the issue of vague sentences. Are people, is this man bald or is he not bald? Is there a difference between one hair and two hairs? And of course, these are difficult cases where the skeptic can get a grip. But so what I want to say is that, of course, there are all those difficulties surrounding the concept of truth. But nevertheless, even if there are all these difficulties, it seems to me that for the life of research, the life of knowledge, the life of science, but also for everyday life, the life of conversation, we need to have the concept of truth. Why? Because when you speak to someone else in a simple and straightforward, ordinary conversation, what you are doing is very simple. You make certain kind of assertions. For instance, you assert that it was raining in Bucharest today. What you want to do is to express your belief to your interlocutor. So you say, it was raining in Bucharest today. You assert this. The interlocutor expects you to say something which is the expression of your belief. And the belief itself has to be true if you really want to get the message to your interlocutor. So this is what I call the basic triangle. You assert certain things. These things are the expressions of your beliefs, and the expressions of your beliefs have to be true. Your assertions have to be true. And of course, there are many exceptions too. You can speak with irony. You can give metaphors. For instance, you can say to a fellow philosopher, he is a good pianist, which means he's not so good as a philosopher.
Yeah.
So in such circumstances, we don't speak the truth. And of course, there are lies. But even somebody who lies needs this triangle: belief, truth, assertion. This is the basics of the communication system that we have. So when we look for knowledge, we have to start from that. So in that respect, it seems to me that it's absolutely not necessary to say that there is a respect for truth. It's just that we can't help it. It is the way it is. If we want our system of communication, our system of expression of everything in life to function, we need that.
It is somehow imposed upon us in order to communicate, to be successful in communication.
It is a kind of a priori principle which governs every kind of communication. So in that respect, I find completely absurd the claim of those philosophers who say there is no truth, we have to be skeptical, we are we are loving an idol, and so on. Because you have to go through that. So that's the first thing. And then there is another issue, which is a question of whether truth is good, whether truth is good for the good life, which is a traditional problem for philosophers.
Let me pause a bit here and interject two questions, two issues. The first one is more historical, and it has to do with the value of truth. You mentioned this fact that radical relativists and nihilists about truth are somehow culturally and philosophically fashionable nowadays. And it seems to me that this is a sort of symptom of a cultural crisis which is pretty similar with the one that we had in Europe in the 4th century BC when Plato was fighting against the sophists. Actually, Socrates was fighting against Protagoras and the other sophists, but Plato was the one who, in his dialogues, made Socrates the main character, fighting this important cultural fight against relativism and for more objectivist values. So we'd like to go back to this issue further in our dialogue. To what extent you believe that we need to engage, at least when we argue in the academia, against this sort of cultural illness, which is, in our postmodernist time, radical relativism and nihilism. And the second issue, which is more systematic, has to do with your distinctions in philosophy, in metaphysics and semantics and epistemology. So on the one hand, when we deal with truth as philosophers, what we are presenting are some platitudes, a bunch of trivialities. For instance, if we refine the realist conception of truth, the Aristotelian conception of truth, we are going to end up with saying the sentence P, within inverted commas, is true in a given language, if and only if P. So basically, that's the definition of truth. A very humble and very basic definition, very minimalist one. But still, you have this opinion, and I share that opinion, that those distinctions are important for leading this discussion and eventually for rejecting those greater views that are now put forward and which might be the source of this intellectual illness that we experience recently in politics, for instance, when people don't care at all about truth.
Well, the situation is not the same as the time of Plato, because Plato was fighting for democracy and for... No, he was not fighting for democracy because he was not a Democrat.
No, he was not a Democrat.
But he was in a context of the Athenian democracy. Today, we are in a context of skepticism, as I said, about truth, of veriphobia. The reason is mostly due to the fact that the world has become global, and so we have plenty of possibilities of opinions, and also the world has become a big internet connection. And so our information age, our internet age, has something to do with the kind of skepticism and relativism that we feel, because on the one hand, we receive a lot of information, but on the other hand, we are very suspicious of this information. So that sort of fuels the relativism of the present day. Now, the question is, should we because of this, become subjectivist about truth? Should we accept this idea that people say that opinions are all-powerful and that we live in the world of opinions? Should we accept this? It seems to me that even if a philosopher or even someone who is not a philosopher wants to say that there is no such thing as truth, that it has no value, and that we live in the reign of opinion, especially because of the internet age, this person will have to carry a certain burden. And the burden will be this. There is a difference between something which is subjective and something which is objective. Even if you meet a policeman who tells you that you have engaged in a passage which is forbidden, you cannot tell him, but I thought that it was not forbidden. Subjectively, I thought I was right. He will tell you, no, I'm sorry, objectively, you were wrong. If you want to justify your views, certainly you could say my views are fine because they are justified. I have my justification. But there is still a distinction to be made between being justified and being true. Somebody can tell you, you are justified, you have reasons, you have your arguments, you have your justifications, but it's not true. I mean, it's perfectly sensible to say such things. And so on and so forth. So these platitudes about truth, that truth is objective, that truth has to correspond, even someone who is a radical subjectivist has to take that into account. And I believe that actually the radical subjectivist is not able to cope with those platitudes. Now, once we know all these conceptual or these notions which are very common and very belong to common sense about truth, of course we can reflect on why it is that there is relativism, and we can examine the issues which you mentioned about the role of truth within this system of communication in which we live today. I believe that the post-truth era is not simply a word which was considered as the most used word 2 years ago in 2016. It's also a spirit of the age. And it seems to me to be reinforced by the information age. Everyone talks about the information age. It's been in the air for many decades. But now we are really in it, in the sense that we have plenty of pretense, plenty of pretensions, of claims to truth, and plenty of claims to falsity, which are around us. And this is where we have to step in as philosophers, it seems to me.
But in order to add another dimension to this discussion and to this kind of crisis, let me add that there are even scientists who are doing hard science or evidence-based science, which are of the opinion that science is just one of that system, that kind of system in which we explain reality. And they profess the doctrine of equal validity, which is that there are, and I quote, there are many radically different yet equally valid ways of knowing the world, with science being just one of them. Paul Feyerabend, who has been a physicist and also a philosopher of science, a student of Karl Popper, claimed that there are no objective standards. Again, first order science is one science among many. And we can go on and on with giving some other passages. For instance, a passage taken from Barry Barnes and David Bloor from a work, Relativism, Rationalism, and the Sociology of Knowledge, in which they say, and I quote, "For the relativists, there is no sense attached to the idea that some standards of beliefs are really rational, as distinct from merely locally accepted as such. Because he or she thinks that there are no context-free or supercultural norms of rationality, he or she does not see rationally and irrationally held beliefs as making up two distinct and qualitatively different classes of things." And a last passage from Kathleen Lennon, Feminist Epistemology as Local Epistemology, which is crystal clear about these commitments against objective standards. She says, and I quote, "Feminist epistemologies, in common with many other strands of contemporary epistemology, no longer regard knowledge as a neutral, transparent reflection of an independently existing reality, with truth and falsity established by transcendent procedures of rational assessment. Rather, most accept that all knowledge is situated knowledge, reflecting the position of the knowledge producer at a certain historical moment in a given material and cultural context." There is also here a reflection of Foucault, of his writings about science as power and not as searching for the truth, for the independent reality of facts.
I think that it would be too long to engage with those philosophers because, but everyone...
Yeah, but what I want to point out is that even scientists who are doing hard science,
yes,
evidence-based science...
It has become very fashionable, even among scientists, to say that science is relative, that science is uncertain, that we never know, that we will never know. I believe that these people exaggerate, because if they were really consistent, for instance, they wouldn't go to the doctor, they wouldn't go to an hospital, they wouldn't get into a plane, because they would have no trust in what the science is providing. Of course, it is correct that science is in many ways uncertain and fragile and fallible. I mean, the doctrine of fallibilism, the idea that there is no truth which is absolutely certain and absolutely firm, is certainly correct. But it doesn't entail that at no point we can be safe with our scientific knowledge. Being safe is like driving a car. You buy your car, the constructor says to you, you can drive your car safely, that is, you can rely on the machine. Of course, the fact that you can rely on the machine doesn't mean that the machine will work all the time in any circumstance and forever. It is certainly fallible, and science is like that. I mean, it's reliable, but it's not absolutely certain. But of course, nobody wants to have absolute certainty. But if you jump into a plane, and if the steward tells you, ladies and gentlemen, you have 98 chances out of 100 to arrive safely at destination, people wouldn't like it. But nevertheless, it is the case. Yeah. And so there is a sort of kind of exaggeration, a kind of hysteresis by those philosophers. The fact that scientific truth is not always secure or certain doesn't mean that it cannot be safe. And so this is a complete and it is pushed to irrationalism, because actually Feyerabend, he once said that science is not better than magic. If you say that, I mean, go to the asylum, go to the hospital, to the psychiatric hospital.
Okay, let's leave aside for a while this problem of relativism, radical relativism and nihilism. There is another major twist recently in the public sphere, and this has a lot to do with the easiness with which we can express our opinions in public, using the resources of the internet, for instance, the Facebook or whatever, the social media. And there is this fact which is called by a Princeton philosopher, Harry Frankfurt, who published in 2005 this small booklet on bullshit. It is this culture of bullshitting, of bullshit. And he says that actually we live in a culture in which we contribute our big share of bullshit. And the crux of the distinction between a bullshitter and a liar is the fact that a liar at least has some respect for the truth. Because a liar knows, or he or she believes that he or she knows what the truth is, but intentionally he or she says the opposite, just to deceive us. Whereas the bullshitter doesn't pay any respect for the truth. So I would like to ask you, because I know that you worked recently in this field, what are the connections between this democratization of the culture via the internet, via the media, via the social networks, and also this threat under which expert knowledge and opinions, objective truth are nowadays, just because we all actually give our share of bullshit to the present culture.
Let me just say one thing first. There is no truth without freedom, and there is no freedom without truth. That was the message of the novel by George Orwell, 1994. Freedom is a freedom to say that 2 + 2 = 4. So we need truth in order to assess freedom. Now we are in an age where this freedom is threatened, and tyranny lurks. Why? First, because internet is pretty much like being in a very dark room. Imagine suddenly that this room were dark, and that everyone would speak up and, for instance, shout. You would hear a lot of noises, but you don't know where the voice comes from. And you don't know who is talking. So that's more or less the situation in which we are on the internet. We have plenty of voice, of opinions, which shout at your face. So what do you do? What you do is you try to get to those shouts which are familiar to you. So you get into what are called information bubbles. And this is reinforced by the social networks. You rely on the opinions and the shouts, so to say, that are familiar to you and the people similar to you. So there are these phenomena which are absolutely pervasive everywhere these days on the internet. These phenomena make it, as you said, make it the case that we have gone into a new world. The old world, which you certainly know much better than I do here in Romania, think of dictatorships. The dictatorship of the Soviet age. Think of the few dictatorships that we still have these days, for instance, in North Korea. The dictator needs the truth. He needs the truth and he lies. Everyone knows that he lies. So this is a system where truth is present because he pretends to say the truth in the Stalinian age, pravda. He pretends to have the truth, but everyone can confront the sayings of the dictator and the power with reality. That was the old age. At that time, everyone could have a judgment about what is the case and what is not the case. Today, the situation is completely different. Today, the situation is such that we don't exactly know where the truth is, and even if we speak of fake news, even if we speak of false informations, even when we speak about manipulation of information, we don't exactly know where the truth lies. We have a kind of universal speech which surrounds us. And this crisis is accentuated by politicians who are clever enough to use this feature of the communication of information today. People, of course, like Trump are good examples, but also the politicians who have provoked Brexit, when, for instance, they said that the British people, if they left Europe, would have something like £3 million more every week. That was what Nigel Farage said. So these people are using these means of communication to create a situation where we don't have simply lies. We have something which I call deception. And deception is exactly what Trump does. He is not trying to say the truth. He is absolutely indifferent to truth. He doesn't respect truth because he doesn't respect what I call the basic triangle. When he speaks, when he says something, he's just talking. He is in a reality show. And so it's just like when you are when you are in a fiction, like in a sitcom on the TV. And so in this regime of spread of information, there is no question of lying or saying the truth. This is why, actually, because this is why fact-checking is useful, but also sometimes completely irrelevant, because it's just talking. So with this sort of thing, you get into a world where your freedom of judgment, your freedom to know, is really threatened. It's threatened by many other phenomena which are very well known by the people who study the spread of information on the internet. One phenomenon is the phenomenon of which is called illusion of knowledge. Because there is a lot of knowledge which exists when you open your computer and you get on the internet. There is an illusion that even though there are things that you don't know, you could access those truths. You could access this knowledge at one point or another. So you have an illusion that even if you don't know personally, other people know for you. So there is this illusion. A second illusion is you have certain opinions, and what you expect to see on the internet are confirmation of your opinions. People who believe the same things as you are your friends, so to say, and they click. Then there is also the phenomenon of information bubble, which I have already mentioned. That is the tendency to pool information. So there are plenty of things of that sort, which are kind of illusions, and some people are clever enough to use them. But it's not very different from what Goebbels had during the Nazi time. Goebbels was a very clever guy who used actually a lot of the technology of the time, especially the radio. And you know how easy it is to spread something on the radio. Everyone remembers that Orson Welles in 1938 broadcasted an information according to which Martians had landed, just like in the novel. And so plenty of people almost were tempted to suicide because they would see a lot of Martians. So, of course, we are not in a situation like this. I cannot expect that there would be a panic of the same sort as in 1938. But we could have phenomena very similar. So some people are very, very good at manipulating this information. And of course, this is a threat to democracy in the sense that there will be people who will be able to manipulate the spread of information. And I believe that bullshitting is their main tool.
Yeah, well, there is another factor which is adding to this attitude of saying bullshit, which is that we feel entitled, we feel that we are under the obligation to answer publicly the questions that are raised in front of us. For instance, if we are interviewed by someone and we are in a public position, even if we don't know anything about that issue, we feel that we have to say something about that. It would be more honest to say, well, I don't know anything about that, I have to inform myself, and afterwards, if I have something important to say about the issue, I'm going to say that. But nevertheless, we may leave the impression that we are too critical about the internet and about this marvelous tool of technology. It seems to me that the internet is a two-edged sword, like any other important tool of technology. And there are important resources, and if we use them properly with insight and with a sort of enlightenment, it is very important to highlight, to focus on the fact that the internet has very, very good aspects. And actually, I am very much in favor when public debates are taking place and many people are objecting against the internet just because there is manipulation, there are fake news and so on and so forth. I am thinking at the situation that you mentioned previously. Before 1990, I was half my age now. So I lived half of my life before 1990, and now I'm the age in which the other half of my life I lived after 1990. So I would have loved to have this instrument of getting information. What I've done before 1990 was actually to look for books, to borrow books from library or from some friends who could get books from the West, and then have them photocopied. I still have piles of photocopies, Xerox copies in my home, just because I am attached to the way I studied when I was very young. So the internet now has that kind of great resources. It's a huge, actually, library that we can use in order to study and to do research. And in connection to that, that's a very important issue for the scholars and for the scientists. If we push for the open access and we can use in a very intelligent way the internet for open access, that will make information cheaper and more accessible, which is very important for the education. So I don't want to look as disagreeing with you on that, but it seemed to me that we sound very critical about the internet.
Yes, but as you said, I mean, the information is now very cheap.
Very accessible.
Very accessible. Well, cheap in the sense that you don't have to go to libraries, you don't have, and many websites you have to pay. There is a paywall, but in many ways it is much easier. Of course, this is a huge progress, and nobody absolutely denies that. And I don't want to deny this. We can also say that in many ways the spread of information helps also democracy, in the sense that many more people have access to information which was just closed down to the eyes of the public. Of course, I mean, it's played, for instance, a role in the Arabic revolutions, the Arabic Spring several years ago. And of course, you can also fight back when some people are trying to hide, to kind of fuzzy, make the information fuzzy. Nevertheless, as you said very justly, you said when it is used intelligently. So the problem is, shall we be intelligent or shall we be stupid? Of course, it's like a glass, half empty, half full. You will tell me, well, if internet is used intelligently, we can use this information and we can respect truth, and it can educate our judgment. But I'm very skeptical too. I must say I'm on the more skeptical side. I have written several papers about the MOOCs. Do you know what the MOOCs
Yes.
are? Massive, online, open courses. It was said to us that
they have that in many American universities, where they enroll
several years ago,
tens of thousands of students.
People came and they said to us, look, you will have an education of the caliber of the education that they have in Harvard or Stanford. Of course, it was those big universities. And everyone in the African jungle, in the most remote places of Papuasia and so on, will have access to the information that they have at Stanford. Bullshit. Why bullshit? Because actually, if you know the statistics, in Africa, only 20% of the people have access at least to a technology such as the internet. Second, everyone who goes on those massive open courses even in the richest and the wealthiest universities, these people have just stopped after 3 or 4 sessions of the MOOCs. I mean, so they were curious to know, but most of them did not finish the class. So I'm skeptical but of course, if it is used intelligently, it can be used as a teacher's manual, as we had. So there are plenty of uses which are good. But I'm extremely skeptical, and I believe that there is a sort of germ, a sort of beginning of tyranny in all this technology. There is a sort of reduction of individual judgment, and in many ways it is just like what George Orwell said just after the turn about the Stalinian regimes. Of course, we have democracy, but of course, some people also tell me, look, the elites, the people who are the experts, those who are in the know, they are going to disappear. Everyone will have knowledge. Of course, we are very worried of experts. We don't like those people who come to us and say, I know the truth, you should shut your mouth. But at the same time, I also know that there are now new elites. And those elites are not based in the Kremlin, or they are not even based in London, or they are not even based in the White House. They are in the Silicon Valley. And they are the people who have the means to change those phenomena. I mean, it seems to me that even if you regulate the internet, even if you propose various measures to temperate those uses, there is still this threat. So, in a way, of course, I share your view that we could use this as a weapon, but I mean, it's a weapon like the guns that we put in the hands of the American kids.
Yeah. Well, we are approaching the end of the dialogue, and let me raise two issues that actually stem from what you said right now. The way I see now the things, the puzzle that is disturbing for me is the following. On the one hand, I'm committed to democracy, to the democratic processes. And I agree with you that democracy is the kingdom, the reign of opinions, and we are fully entitled to express our opinions. On the other hand, I cherish science and objective standards and the value of truth in science. So, two issues. What is the role, if any, of the truth in politics? Since democratic politics is just a matter of negotiations, reasonableness, arguing in favor of some objectives and so on and so forth. So it's not a matter of objective standards and truth. So what is the role of truth in politics? And here I got a quote from one of your very famous compatriots, Bernard-Henri Lévy, who says, the people listen less and less to politics, and they even seem less concerned about whether the candidates are telling the truth or not. So that is on the one side. On the other side, on the other hand, we have this eminent role of the elites of the sciences, and this role is questioned more and more by the people in those very important problems that are paramount for the society, like, for instance, global warming or vaccines. That has been a huge debate in Romania. And since everyone can look on the internet and find some, I don't know, would-be arguments against vaccination and a would-be correlation between vaccination and autism, then we launch an attack against the expertise of physicians, of chemists, and so on and so forth. So it seems that we live in not in a very troubled time, but in a time in which we cannot accommodate and strike that kind of equilibrium between truth, opinion, and the expertise of the scientists. And altogether, that has to do with the way we are doing politics now. So what is your stance on those two issues?
Well, you raise a number of questions, and there are various levels to distinguish. I think there is a foundational level about the legitimacy of a certain kind of the state and about politics in general. I mean, do we need truth at all? Some people dislike this idea because they believe that if we reintroduce truth at the bottom of our political, the justification of politics, this will be like restoring religion. And nobody wants to have, I mean, except possibly the Ayatollah Khomeini and such people, nobody wants to have priests at the top of the state. Even in regimes where religion plays a large role, even if the Americans have the name of God on their dollar bills, nobody believes that God should rule politics So that's one point. That's the foundational level. We distrust that idea. Then also there is the question of political action. Politics is action. Action is not knowledge. Action is not the same thing as knowledge. Knowledge, you look for truth. But action is not looking for truth. It's looking for the good of the people. And so, and action is very uncertain. And so, everyone, there are people who say that you cannot have truth in politics because politics is a matter of practice. It's a matter of action. So it's a different domain. So on these points, I would tend to agree. Now, there is a question that you raise of the experts, the question of the equilibrium between people who know or pretend to know and people who don't know but have a right to know. It seems to me that in any situation, at any point, we still need to have people who are able to tell what is what, which is which. And so it seems to me that in a regime of democracy, even if there are cases where truth doesn't play a big role, it's true that truth is sometimes just a kind of protection against a certain kind of tyranny. I mean, if you have a dictatorship, truth is a very useful thing. If you have populism, truth is also a very good thing. I mean, as soon as certain things are revealed and said and exposed, but maybe it doesn't have a leading role. I mean, religious people might want truth, their own truth, their religious truth, their absolutist truth. They may want it to be in the rule. So, of course, democracy is not like that. But it doesn't follow that truth has no role to play. I mean, it's a kind of protection. It's a bit like the security belt which you have in your car, if I may say so. And for this reason, we will always need it. Now, about the experts, it seems to me that in some cases, especially about the abuses and the misuses of the internet communication, we should be a bit more paternalistic. We should.
In what sense?
In the sense that we should correct. So we should not let certain kind of websites to operate in the open. I believe in the motto of one of the French revolutionaries, Saint-Just, who said, "No freedom for the enemies of freedom." So if you have sects and if you have groups who try to invade the internet in the way it was done in various circumstances, well, a certain kind of authoritarian rule has to be applied. I know this is not it's a difficult view to hold, but a certain amount of paternalism. Think, for instance, of juries. When there is a trial, in the jury, sometimes a certain kind of information is not disclosed to the jurors. Mm-hmm. So in some cases, it is useful not to have always the truth. Or think, for instance, about the episode of WikiLeaks, where this guy...
in those cases of the sites which are anti-Semitic or racist, there is no truth there.
Think, for instance, of WikiLeaks. I mean, the argument of the countries where some information has been disclosed was that this was a threat to their military integrity. I mean, mm-hmm. if at some point you have a cyber war, which is something which people talk about, as I said, I mean, there are cases where you are not going to offer all the information you have to your opponents, to your enemies. Mm-hmm. If you have an enemy, and if you say, look, here is my money, here is my credit card number, you're not going to say this thing. So we need at some point something which is not always telling the truth. So this sort of ideal of openness which goes with a certain view of democracy seems to me an illusion. It will also create a lot more tyranny, if I may say so.
And the last question from my part, and then we can open up for the audience if they want to make comments and to raise questions. Many people in the audience, we included, are in the academia. We are professors, we teach students. What would be the role of the education for cultivating respect for truth and for truthfulness? So is there a sort of role that the humanities, social sciences, and of course the hard sciences should have in order to cultivate this attitude, this positive attitude toward the value of truth?
Well, as an educator, I cannot say.
And we are both logicians as well.
I cannot say to you that education doesn't play a role. But what we have to say is that it has to be reformed and it has to be sought in a different way. We obviously have to have competitors. I mean, now there are all those robots who are much better than we are in some cases. There are people, the students have access to encyclopedias which are in many ways much better than we are. So our role will have to be with the critical part, the formation of judgment. Maybe less with respect to the spread of knowledge. I mean, anyone can get to a very, if we have good websites, if we have good information, we can refer people to that, and if they are able to learn, but something where education is going to be irreplaceable, which will always stay, is the way we calibrate the information, the way we learn to people how to judge and to keep their individual judgment. And that is something which no website, no spread of knowledge, no extended mind can do.
So in our case, if I may, when the students have a choice between Wikipedia and the Stanford Encyclopedia for Philosophy, we would rather say to them, go to the Stanford Encyclopedia for Philosophy to be better informed than to Wikipedia.
Well, yes and no. Because, of course, there are websites and encyclopedias which are better than others. And, of course, I don't have very much trust in Wikipedia because it says, I mean, the American writer Philip Roth discovered several years ago that many things that were said about him on Wikipedia were false. But what I would say is this: even if we have a very, very good website, even if we have very good information and very good tools, we still have to teach people to use those tools. I mean, it's internet is just like getting certain tools, but if the tools are there to repaint your living room or to repair your furniture and so on, this cannot just be done by kit. So there is this sort of idea that everyone will have access universally to everything. That's not true. I mean, that's not correct. I mean, even if you have a very, very good robot for learning to drive, even if you have a Telsa car which is supposed to drive itself by itself, I mean, you will need at some point to control it. And actually, as everyone knows, this kind of car has not been very successful up to now.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Professor Pascal Angel, for this wonderful dialogue and the views that you presented to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the occasion to speak about this technology in a place which incarnates the spirit.
Thank you. Now we have questions, yeah. I'm afraid we don't have a mic, a mobile mic, but, well, if you
Maybe
speak
you could
loud.
use mine.
Yeah. Speak louder, yeah.
Louder,
Yeah.
I guess. Yes. Well, I have noticed you used a set of very interesting characters in this conversation. You have the liars, the bullshitters, we have nihilists, we have radical relativists and so on, and people like that. And I think I see the bad connection between all these people. And I think that connection would be an arbitrary attitude towards the truth, and that reflects upon beliefs and knowledge and other statements that these people make and how they treat other things. But wouldn't you say that democracy is exactly the diminishment even of course, arbitrary governance and behavior, but also the diminishment of arbitrary attitudes towards other groups and, of course, towards knowledge and other things like that. I mean, and the internet could be a tool of the diminishment, and very good technological tools, diminishment of this arbitrary attitude, and educators could have a role in, I don't know, learning about the accountability of ones who prepare to or say they know the truth or speak the truth, or perhaps even the transparency of the stages of truth communication, because maybe there's this problem of the lack of transparency, and that's why skeptics maybe are so popular, because they feel that a large segment of the public does not see not the accountability, but also that could be also a problem. But the transparency of the truth communication. Some things are not transparent to them, and then they just dismiss it. So could this be like the next strategy for the educators to cultivate responsibility, accountability, transparency, and seeking that transparency in the communicators of truth and larger issues?
Well, yes, of course, this would be much desirable. I don't know any studies which show, for instance, how the fact that a certain kind of debate has happened on the internet has actually improved the situation. There are many studies which show that the going to the internet for a certain kind of debate, say for instance debates about abortion, debates about medical treatments, or even debates about whether a certain kind of war is justifiable. All the political debates seem to me, I mean, maybe this is because I have a too much critical spirit, I have a philosophical deformation of my understanding, but I have a tendency to feel that it may be interesting because it gives you an array of views which you would not have encountered before. But I think that would work if there were the possibility of everyone jumping into this kind of conversation. But most of the time when there are debates on the internet, I mean, at the beginning of the internet, there were many conversations. I mean, there were many people speaking and so giving view. And today on websites, you have all those anonymous voices, people who sometimes say intelligent things, but these intelligent things are sort of completely forgotten and in the sense that they are swamped by the other internet. So this is why I use this metaphor of many voices which come. So of course, if I suddenly shut down the light in this room, some voices will be maybe more audible than others, but maybe there will be a very small voice somewhere which will not be heard. So I would like to be more optimistic, and I would like to know, for instance, I have studied the MOOCs. I know of no study about the development of this technology for university teaching, which has shown that actually the skills and the capacities of people have improved. Maybe they have had more, as Mircea said, they have had more access to information. The information is easier, and maybe this will be a great. I'm thinking, for instance, of countries like those in Africa. The fact that these people have access to this teaching on the internet is a huge improvement. I agree, and that depends very much on the level. But in many other cases, there was no. I mean, in many of the cases of the MOOCs, it was actually shown that the traditional learning was better. So if you have counter studies which would show that the use of certain kind of technologies radically improves, I would buy the conclusion with pleasure.
Yeah, over there.
Thank you very much for the captivating talk. I would add just another dimension from the point of view of historical research, that of historical truth. Because it starts even before Plato with Thucydides. In the first book of his Peloponnesian, the history of the Peloponnesian War, he mentions that he writes only for those who are
Yes, of course. I mean, this is a large part of the way in which you can spread falsities and fake news. Some people rewrite history. And of course, it is the role of the historian. But to give the correct answer, and they spend their time actually to avoid these false rewritings. The problem is, do you think that, for instance, if we have more websites where history is known, more accuracy in the description of events, do you think that this will improve a certain respect for historical truth? I'm not completely sure. I'm not completely sure because people are always kind of rewriting these things. For instance, recently in France, we had a kind of episode where we wanted to commemorate the name of an extremely famous right-wing publicist called Charles Maurras, who was one in the 1930s, one of the leaders of the French fascists, so to say. I mean, a kind of French fascist. And people did not. People said no. We should not bring this guy back because he incarnates something which we don't like. But in such a situation, I think it was completely stupid because what the historians wanted was that the figure itself would be remembered and not that it would be praised. So people misunderstand praise and appraisal, so to say. Praise and historical judgment. So that happens all the time. But of course, I'm not saying that this is worse with the internet. It existed before. Just, I mean, think of the rumors. Think of the spread of false information, urban legend. I mean, it has always existed. But now we have an increase. It's like the pollution. I mean, there used to be a bit of pollution of the oceans 1 century ago, and a huge pollution by the industries. But now we have a lot of pollution. So the fake news is just like having this sea of plastic, which is said to be at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Yeah. Well, the very first commitment that you have, and this is an advice which is given by the historian Timothy Snyder in his book on tyranny, which he has written last year. Mm-hmm. He says, respect professional ethics. Provided that at least you respect this, you will be safeguarded against intrusions. But of course, this is not to say that a doctor, an historian, a philosopher, a mathematician is not subject to external influences in his own work. I mean, if you're a mathematician, if your theory, say for instance, is used for certain kind of military purposes, you have to go beyond the issues about your professional ethics. But it seems to me that the professional ethics is the basics. And the most important professional ethics, which I find violated all the time today, is the professional ethics of journalists. There are many, many very bad journalists. I'm sorry if there are journalists here, but it's true that it is more and more difficult for people in journalism to keep up with the standards of their profession. Their profession is invaded by a lot of Attilas, I would say.
We have 3 questions in the back and 1 here. Please, sir. 1, 2, 3, and this is the 4th.
not always search the transcendental condition and then we recalibrate our vocabulary, and then we externalize this and eliminate those self-contradictory phrases that are used in the common sense. Are we living truly in this? Are we living truly in a post-truth age?
Well, it is, of course, a very moot and difficult issue. I mean, if I look at the history of ideas, it seems to me clear that we have much less trust in the idea that our philosophical theories could be true, much less than in the past. It was already difficult. There is, as Mircea mentioned, this distrust of science, the fact that some scientists accept all the views of the sociology of science and have a distrust in science, even when they are themselves scientists, seems to show that there is this. And then there is also the political situation. So, well, of course, it's correct to say that in many ways we are looking for truth. I mean, you want to know what your bank account, how much money is on your bank account. You want to know whether there is going to be rain tomorrow. You want to know plenty of things. In that respect, we are not post-truth. I mean, everyone uses this notion in daily life. But the mythology of truth has certainly disappeared, I would say. There is a mythology of truth which was still present, and it certainly comes also with the fact that we are much less inspired by religion than we used to be. I mean, as Richard Rorty said, someone who comes with a word truth, it looks like a priest. And we do not, I mean, except in some places in the world, the world truth is that. Of course, this is an Occidental thing. I mean, if you tell me, well, go to Iraq these days and look at the political and the people who were in Mosul, the Daesh people, look whether they didn't believe in truth. Of course they did. Of course, they were not in a post-truth era, that's true. But nevertheless, they use the technology of the internet to spread all the falsities. So they have to recognize one way or another, even though their doctrine is that there is only one God, one truth, and everyone has to comply, they still use the techniques which I consider as completely pollution of truth. So the answer is not simple.
Let's take the next one over there.
Well, if that depends pretty much. I mean, if there is more access to if the phenomenon of what is called the information bubble, where you sort of live in your own world, is broken, if you manage, if I could find websites or conversations on the internet where voices come from many angles, I would be very happy. But this is not what I find these days. I mean, these days it's very difficult. So I don't know exactly how to overcome this effect, which is sort of constitutive of the way information is accessed. But certainly this can be done in many ways. I mean, if people did with the website the work which used to be done by newspaper people. There used to be, in the old days, remember, maybe you didn't know this, all the newspapers had a readers section where people wrote letters, and the information was not given for all readers. So there were replies by the editor and so on. So if we manage to have this kind of thing, things would be better. And we would have to also to block the anonymous. I mean, I think that in many cases, if people spoke with their real name, they would not be tempted to give insults on the internet, you damn fool, you silly idiot, and so on, because it's also pollution in this way. So we have to sort of manage this in a different way. But I don't know exactly how to do it. It's probably a matter of technology. If someone managed to have a good way of entry of various sorts of dissenting views, that would be good. And also people who would act as arbiters. I mean, after all, we have arbiters at the soccer game. Why shouldn't there be arbiters also in the intellectual domain? I mean, where you see some people who are sort of overcoming the rules and who do not respect the rules, you can whistle. I don't know. I must say that I have no idea I could manage with this. I don't have any recipe.
The third question, there in the back. Yes, you, sir.
I'm not sure I have been able to
Can you repeat louder
can you repeat
the essence of
your
the
question?
message?
Because it was a voice which was not strong enough.
A bit louder, yeah.
You mean? Well, I'm not really sure to have understood you well, but it seems to me that the question you raise is, why should we get many truths if we are not able to understand them? That is it possible to have truths without meaning? Is it the kind of question that you raise? Because, yes, of course, I mean, this is part of the problem. Part of the problem is that we don't need only truths. We also need relevant truths. We need important truths. So we need to have a sense of what is important and not important. And this is why I insisted on bullshit. Because bullshit is like speaking to someone in a cafe. You say various things, just talking, and you say things which are irrelevant. What we want is, of course this is something which goes without saying, but I should have said it, we want interesting and relevant truths. We don't just want any truth. I mean, of course, the fact that there are many leaves of grass and that there is an exact number of leaves of grass in my garden is a fact, but I don't care. And there are plenty of facts we don't care about. And this is part of the problem with the internet. You are obliged, when you look at websites, to look at completely uninteresting things. It's just like in publicity, like marketing. You are invaded by information which you don't want. And so maybe this is related to the previous question. You have to filter out. I don't know whether this was your question, but that's the way I would see the difference.
Yeah. So unfortunately we cannot hear too well what I'm saying. Let's take the last question over here. Yeah, sir.
Interestingly, you never once said the word power in your discourse. And,
The word power.
The word power.
I said it. In connection with Foucault.
Okay. Because it seems to me that it's another one of the things that is related, deeply related with the truth, among other that you cited. And a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to ask Jean Nancy if he thinks that there is a capitalism of knowledge in the same way that there is a capitalism of financial capitalism. And he seemed to agree, that yes, you can consider all the papers with value in knowledge, like diplomas, articles, books, degrees, and so on, as having the same role in this capitalism of knowledge as the mind has in the financial capitalism. So in that spirit, wouldn't you agree, you touched the question a little bit in the last question, the one with the experts. Wouldn't you agree that maybe this post-truth era is the second coming, or maybe the second part of the French Revolution, in which we decapitated the kings in order to give a little bit of power to the people, but in fact it was not the people, but just an elite.
That's the challenge.
And that maybe the day has come when the people who were betrayed by the elite, through this mechanism of meritocracy, which was good at the beginning, but maybe the day has come when it does not work anymore. Saw its end in some way. And just to finish the question, is it maybe that Trump, who is not the first politician that uses the strategies of deceiving, but isn't it maybe that he's the first one that has that critical mass of citizens that he can be a representative of? That maybe enough citizens today seem to agree that they have been betrayed by the French Revolution in the way it has been done?
Well, I touched a little bit this issue without mentioning the word power when I talked about the elites. We can have two ways with the elites. We could see the history as a sort of progress towards getting rid of the elites. Of course, we come from societies where there are people who are supposed to know, and these people, because they know the truth, they have more power. And there is the idea that the more we get rid of such people, the freer we are going to be. I think that it's something which is probably not false, but which is not true either. Because, as I said, the information era has created other elites. I'm convinced that the so-called capitalism of information that you mentioned, or the capitalism of
knowledge.
I'm quite sure that it has actually created new elites and another distribution of power. So power has not disappeared. Nevertheless, I don't want to accept a view like Michel Foucault's view, where power is bad in every way. I mean, I was a student of Foucault when I was at the university, and he had this idea that every kind of power is bad. Of course, we can regulate those sorts of power, and maybe they could be regulated so that there would not be a class of experts. But at any point we shall need some people who know more than others. I mean, I think it's a complete illusion that, that everyone could sort of jump in the knowledge circle and become, I cannot become knowledgeable about mathematics even by training. If I decided to play the piano as well as our friend who gave us this wonderful concert at the beginning, it would take me a lot of time. So there are competences. And so, of course, the problem is how to use them correctly and how to spread them correctly. The most competent people are, and those who have authority, are those who are the best place to spread it. Now, of course, all of this comes with a certain kind of economy. The phenomena I've been hinting at would not exist if there were not a certain economical model on the internet. It depends how many clicks you have. Cut this condition that people have to go to the internet website and click. Cut this, and you will come back to a more healthy state. I mean, the idea is just that you attract as many people on your own. And of course, this is pure capitalism. It's just as it existed in the 19th century. And Karl Marx could have written The Capital of Knowledge, of course, he could.
Okay, I would suggest to end here on this interesting question and answer. So thank you for your questions and comments. Thank you for being this evening with us. Thank you, Professor Pascal Angel, for this wonderful philosophical dialogue.
For your hospitality. Thank you for being here. Okay.
We have to take out this.
Yes.